Bill Gates is one of the richest people on Earth, and for the longest time, he was the richest man on Earth. However, he didn't rise to the top without facing a few hardships. Let's take a look at some of the hardest moments of Bill Gates' life and what were some of the things he did to tackle those problems. Welcome back to Coach Stack, your secret weapon for improving yourself through business, investing, and personal growth. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and notification bell so you don't miss out on our next videos. Starting at a young age. Bill Gates, being born in 1955, wasn't exactly from a time when computers or software were really popular. Most people had absolutely no idea how big computers would eventually become, but Bill Gates definitely knew that these devices would one day change the world. Bill Gates started working with computers when he was only 13 years old. Knowing how the internals of a computer works at 13 years of age is even considered genius level today, but back in 1968, Bill Gates might have been the only teenager who knew how to work a computer. He started writing software around that age as well. His school even let him take time off on his classes so he could focus more on programming. He managed to create a software that lets you play tic-tac-toe on a computer. While that may be laughably simple now, it was almost revolutionary for the time, since you were essentially playing against an AI that was impossible to beat. Can you imagine how difficult it must have been for a teenager to develop software like this at a time like that? Bill Gates' parents always encouraged him to take on whatever challenge he faced, and that might have been the motivating factor on why he kept on progressing his programming capabilities no matter how difficult it got. His failed early business. While Bill Gates may have always been successful as a software developer, he wasn't always the best when it came to business. I know it sounds crazy to think that even a man who was once the richest man on Earth could actually fail at doing business, but it's actually true. Bill Gates and Paul Allen initially created a company called Trafodata. The premise was quite simple. It would basically collect traffic data automatically and send it to traffic engineers all around the country. Genius, right? Well, it worked as a software, but as a business, it was a total failure. The biggest problem with it was the fact that it literally had no customers. To have any kind of successful business, you need to have a market to sell it to. No matter how good your product is, if you can't sell it, it's practically worthless. Unfortunately for Gates, he had to learn this the hard way. Trafodata lost Gates over $3,000, which may be pocket change for him today, but back then when he first launched it, it was a major setback. I guess the lesson you can learn from this is no matter how many failures you have in business, there's always something bright around the horizon. Launching Microsoft. Bill Gates never intended on becoming the CEO of a major company. He just wanted to teach math since it was something he was good at. If it weren't for Paul Allen constantly persuading Bill Gates to start an actual career in software development instead of just doing it as a hobby, we may have never even heard of Bill Gates. Gates revealed in a 2018 speech at Harvard that launching Microsoft was one of the scariest things he has ever had to deal with. He had just made a shift from having aspirations of being an academic to having aspirations of being a CEO, and the two couldn't be more different. It was uncharted territory for Gates, and things weren't as smooth as he'd hoped. Soon enough, one by one, some of the companies that Gates had idolized growing up were going bankrupt. Companies like Digital Equipment and Wang. These were some of the pioneers of early computing, and they were now gone, which worried Gates. On top of that, he worried that he was too inexperienced. Despite being the CEO, he was much younger than almost everyone who worked under him. As anxious as Gates may have been during the early years of Microsoft, he and Allen believed in the company and they believed in innovating, which is exactly why Microsoft is successful today. Antitrust Lawsuit. Imagine having the biggest company in the world. Suddenly, you're at the top and everyone has their eyes on you and wants to claw you down. This was basically Bill Gates in the late 90s and early 2000s. He didn't just have to worry about competitors like Apple trying to take him down, but at this point, it had even reached the government. In the 90s, Apple was nearing bankruptcy. Microsoft was on top and there was absolutely no one else that was able to compete. This led to many people wondering whether or not Microsoft had a total monopoly over the PC industry, and the Federal Trade Commission thought the same. The FTC had tried to get Microsoft in the past, but they failed. However, this time they had a solid case on their hands. The internet had just exploded in popularity, and Netscape had just come out with a crazy new concept called an internet browser that lets you go on specific websites on the World Wide Web. Crazy, right? Well, it was pretty crazy back then. However, Microsoft quickly jumped on the bandwagon and started offering their own web browser completely for free. In fact, they built the browser onto their software. This led to the almost immediate collapse of Netscape, their primary competitor, and it sparked outrage in the business world. The FTC brought forward the case in 1998, and eventually it was settled in 2002. However, the damage was done. Microsoft was now seen as evil or anti-competitive, and it diverted the company's attention away from innovating, allowing competitors like Apple to eventually gain the upper hand. Rescuing Apple and seeing it grow. We might have just talked about Microsoft's antitrust lawsuit, but this was one of the most competitor-friendly decisions Bill Gates ever made. In 1997, Apple was just weeks away from going completely bankrupt. If that were to happen, Microsoft would be the only player in town and would definitely become a monopoly. Fortunately for Apple, Gates was not ready to let this happen. Gates made a $150 million investment in Apple, saving it from bankruptcy. Bill Gates, through this action, single-handedly brought some competition back to Microsoft, and Steve Jobs was extremely grateful, saying, "Bill, thank you. The world's a better place."
We've kept our marriage secret for over a decade now.
Apple rebounded after that, and they've never looked back since. They overtook Microsoft in market value in just under 15 years after Bill Gates' investment, and surely this is something he must have lost sleep over. If we take a closer look into the investment, it was probably a way of Bill Gates making sure that Microsoft doesn't turn into a monopoly, in which case it was probably the right thing to do. Not predicting Android. You wouldn't normally expect Bill Gates to publicly announce his biggest regret yet, and in fact, there has only been one regret that Bill Gates has publicly admitted to, and that was his inability to predict the rise of Android.
The biggest mistake I made in terms of something that was clearly within our skill set, we were clearly the company that should have achieved that, and we didn't. We allowed this Motorola design win and therefore the software momentum to go to Android, and so it became the dominant non-Apple mobile phone operating system globally.
Google acquired Android in 2005, but they didn't really turn it into what it was until the release of the iPhone in 2007. That was around the time when Microsoft and Apple were the two big software giants, and Google was still primarily just a search engine and an advertising company that was nowhere near that level. However, when it came to smartphone software, Microsoft was nowhere to be seen at the time. Bill Gates said that Microsoft should have taken on the challenge of developing a smartphone software in the early 2000s, but due to his own mismanagement, they never even thought of doing so. He also pointed out that there was only room for one Apple competitor in the smartphone business, and that would ultimately become Google's Android. By the time Microsoft did jump on the smartphone bandwagon, it was too late. Android and iOS completely dominated the smartphone industry, and Windows Phone was simply unable to get even a small chunk of that market share. Bill Gates had long left Microsoft by then, but considering Android turned into a $400 billion market, it definitely must be something he thinks about a lot. That's a wrap for the hard moments from Bill Gates' life. What's the biggest lesson you learned from Bill Gates? Let us know in the comments below. As always, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you in the next one.